tutorial, Dimitri's asked me to make a small video on, let's say, making graphs in SPSS. So this is what we're going to do. So you already know how to use this function, let's say, function in the toolbar, analyze. Now I'm going to look at this one here, graphs, how to create graphs. And now let's make one. Let's for instance make a bar chart. How do you do this? You make a simple bar chart, so it tells you something about the distribution of a certain variable. And if, for instance, if we make a simple bar chart concerning, well, let's say what, we want to know the percentage of people that lived in a rural area. So that's always nice to know. You first of all click this one, simple, and rural I already put it in, but let's say put it on reset. So this is what you will see in your screen. Click rural, get it in, and for instance we want to know the percentages. We're not necessarily interested in the count, but more in the sense we want to know the percentages. We click on OK, and what do we see? This is, let's say, the distribution graphically of the people who lived in rural areas and non-rural areas. So what do we see? Let's say a little over 70% lives in the city, or let's say around 30% lives in a rural area. This is actually it. This is how you create these graphs, and you can, let's say, make extensions on this. How should we do this? For instance, if we want to make the same graph, these two bars, this simple bar chart, for people who live in rural areas and people who don't live in rural areas. And by the way, I hope you understand that 0 stands for not living in a rural area, while 1 stands for living in a rural area. And we do this again, same, but let's say, for instance, we can also, let's say, make a subdivision within those people who live in rural areas. For instance, I'm interested, the people who live in rural areas, are they also college graduates? Colgrad can be, let's say, your subdivision within these bar charts. If you place this one here and click again, what do you see? The same graph, only split it up in non-college graduates, the 0 for non-college graduates and the 1 for college graduates. So what do we have here? This is the percentage who lives in rural areas and is a college graduate. Not that large. What is this? This is the people who live in non-rural areas and are non-college graduates. This is the percentage of people that live in a rural area and are not college graduates, and so on. So this is how you can use these bar charts. You can make you get bedazzled if you know what you can do with all these charts. But let's say this is a very simple one. Now, for instance, another thing you can do is, for instance, make a box plot. This is probably what is discussed during the lectures with Dimitris. So let's make a box plot. Here it is, box plot. And let's make a very simple one. A simple one, and we use separate variables. This is important for you to click on. Use define. It's already experienced here, but for instance, if we look at, for instance, birth year of all the respondents, and just click on OK, we get this box plot. And a box plot is usually a nice nicely gives a picture of how this variable is distributed. Now, this distribution of this variable, what was it? Birth year is, let's say, looks nice. And looks nice, what do I mean with looks nice? It's quite symmetrical. So let's say this line is almost in the middle, so it's a little bit skewed to the right, but yeah, it's quite symmetrical. But I'm not going to talk a lot on the interpretation of, let's say, box plots, but this is how you create one. If we create another one, just for the fun of it, And we don't use birth date, but for instance, which one should we use? For instance, experience, the years of experience. Plug it in, click on OK. We again get a box plot, but a little bit different because this one is differently distributed. What do we see? This is not so nicely distributed, and again, these things are usually perceived as outliers. So let's say we have those whiskers, as they are called in English, those whiskers of the box plot, and let's say within the whiskers, let's say you have, let's say, all the numbers you would expect, and here are a lot of, let's say, numbers that are beyond those boundaries. So for instance, item, or let's say respondent 22,038 is quite an outlier concerning work experience. Let's say almost 30 years of work experience. So there you go. Okay guys, this is how you create bar charts, box plots, whatever. Please go ahead.